I thought I was just stepping out for 30 minutes, just a quick run to grab groceries. I locked the door behind me, humming a tune, joking under my breath about how Karen, the HOA president, probably had already filed a complaint about my lawn gnome being slightly off-center. That's Karen. She could find a violation in a rock if she wanted to. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and for a brief moment the world felt calm, almost peaceful. I had no idea that peace was about to shatter. I got into my car, glanced at the neighborhood, and thought about how quiet it was. Too quiet. My street was usually alive with kids riding bikes, dogs barking, neighbors yelling greetings or complaints. But today it was eerily silent, as if the whole block was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I shrugged it off. I always noticed things like this when I was overthinking, and I didn't have time to overthink. I had a list of errands to finish. 30 minutes passed, or so I thought. I walked down the grocery aisle, grabbing a few essentials, checking my phone. Nothing unusual. No alerts, no calls, just my usual boring, mundane life. And that's exactly what made it so easy for me to ignore the tiny, creeping sense of unease growing in the back of my mind. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was my gut telling me something was off. Either way, I pushed it aside. Life was busy, and I had better things to do than worry about HOA drama. Or so I thought. I paid for my groceries, tossed them into the trunk, and headed back home. I started feeling that familiar mix of exhaustion and relief, the kind you get when you're almost home, almost safe. But as I turned onto my street, the first flicker of unease hit me like a cold splash of water. My driveway looked different, slightly off. I stopped my car, squinting, trying to process what I was seeing. The front door wasn't closed properly. The lights inside were on, even though I was sure I had turned everything off before leaving. My heart started to beat faster. Okay, I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I forgot to lock the door. Maybe a neighbor came by. Maybe it's nothing. But even as I told myself that, every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. The air felt heavy, charged with tension. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes, sounding unnaturally loud. Each step toward my house felt like walking into a storm I couldn't see yet. I reached the porch and froze. Something had definitely happened while I was gone. A chair from my patio was overturned. My welcome mat was pushed to the side. And there in my own living room, framed by the front window, Karen. She was standing there, clipboard in hand, looking like she had just conquered a kingdom. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen, the queen of HOA tyranny, had somehow entered my home without permission. And not just her. There was a tension in the room, a kind of audacious confidence in her stance, like she owned the place. I wanted to call out, to yell, to demand an explanation, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. I watched her, frozen, trying to make sense of the absurdity of it all. And then the internal panic started, racing faster than anything I had ever felt. This wasn't just some petty fine or a letter in the mailbox anymore. This was real. This was happening, and she wasn't going anywhere without a fight. My hands were shaking as I slowly inched closer to the door. Every step felt like it was amplified, echoing through the quiet street. My mind raced through the options: call the cops, confront her, run. Every possibility seemed both terrifying and impossible, and in that moment, standing there on my porch, I realized that my life, my house, and my sanity were about to collide with the full force of Karen's wrath. I had no idea how intense this was about to get. But one thing was certain: this was no ordinary HOA dispute. This was war. And I was just getting home. I stood frozen on my porch, heart hammering, staring at Karen like I'd stumbled into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Her eyes snapped toward mine, and for a split second I thought she might actually back off. Maybe she'd realized she had crossed a line. But no, her face hardened and she straightened her shoulders, clutching that ridiculous clipboard like it was a shield of authority. She looked every bit the queen of petty power trips, as if the HOA bylaws themselves had handed her a crown and told her to conquer my living room. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Karen, what are you doing in my house?" I managed, my words trembling more than I wanted. My brain was screaming at me to stay calm, to think, but all I could feel was the adrenaline making every nerve in my body scream. This was my home, my safe place, and now it was. Karen opened her mouth, clearly ready to unleash some long, dramatic tirade about fines, bylaws, and violations. But I stopped mid-step when I noticed how absurd she looked, her glasses slightly crooked, hair disheveled, waving that clipboard like a sword. I couldn't help it. A tiny, nervous laugh escaped me. Not out of disrespect, but because in that moment she was more comical than threatening. Her glare turned icy. "This is my duty," she snapped. "And you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 3B of the HOA rules." I blinked. Section 12. Paragraph 3B? I had no idea what she was even talking about. I didn't even know my mailbox had rules. I had tried to follow the HOA rules before, even bought a color-coded trash bin to stay on her good side, and still, here she was, breaking into my house like she was some vigilante of suburban decorum. But I couldn't laugh out loud, not yet. I needed to think. I needed to survive this without letting her see she was rattling me. So I took a slow, deliberate step closer, forcing myself to act calm even though my chest felt ready to explode. "Karen," I said evenly, "you can't just come into my home like this. You have no authority here. None." Her face twitched, like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to speak to her that way. "I'm protecting the neighborhood. You're trespassing," I cut in, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my property. You don't get to enforce your rules inside my house. You can't just—" Suddenly, she lunged slightly forward, waving the clipboard for emphasis, trying to assert control like she always did. And then it happened. My neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, appeared at the window, peeking inside with his binoculars. Karen froze mid-sentence, realizing we weren't exactly alone anymore. I felt a rush of relief mixed with amusement. "See, Karen," I said quietly, though loud enough for her to hear. "The whole neighborhood is watching. Maybe now you'll think twice about storming in." Her eyes darted around, panicked, trying to find a way out of this unexpected audience. "I'm just enforcing rules," she sputtered, her voice losing its sharp edge. And that's when the first spark of confidence hit me. I realized I wasn't powerless. She may have barged in, may have tried to make my house her courtroom, but I still had control. I still had my wits. And if I played this right, maybe, just maybe, I could turn this ridiculous invasion around. I stepped closer, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Karen," I said, letting every word land like a small hammer, "I need you to leave, now, or I'll call the police. And honestly, I think the neighbors might have a few questions for you, too." Her face turned red, a mix of fury and embarrassment. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Every second felt stretched into eternity, and I knew one wrong move, hers or mine, could escalate this into chaos. She opened her mouth again, clearly plotting some last dramatic declaration, and my stomach twisted. My palms were sweating, heart racing, adrenaline surging. This was the moment that would define who had control of the house, and perhaps, in a way, who had the upper hand in the neighborhood war with Karen. And then, just as she was about to speak, she froze. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, and I could tell. She was realizing that maybe this time she'd bitten off more than she could chew. But she wasn't out yet. Oh no, Karen never gives up easily. And as I braced myself for the next move, I knew this was only the beginning. What happened next would change everything, and there was no turning back. I could feel my heart pounding so loudly that I was sure Karen could hear it over her own frantic muttering. She looked around, wildly gesturing at my furniture like it was evidence in some criminal trial. "You can't just, you're in violation, the landscaping, the mailbox, the paint," she barked, her words tripping over each other like a stuttering alarm. I tried to stay calm, though the adrenaline made it hard to even think straight. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, "you're trespassing. You have no right to be here. You need to leave now." She froze for a second, blinking at me as if I'd just grown two heads. Then she straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and gave me a look that was equal parts rage and disbelief. You can't talk to me like that. I enforce the rules, I held up my hand, cutting her off. "No, Karen, this is my house. You're overstepping. End of story." For a moment, it seemed like she might argue back, but then she glanced toward the front window. I followed her gaze and realized she'd noticed Mr. Jenkins still peeking from behind his curtains. His binoculars were trained on us like he was watching a live soap opera. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her grand invasion wasn't happening in secret. That's when I noticed something else, something that made my chest tighten with both fear and resolve. She wasn't alone. Two of her so-called enforcers, neighbors who clearly followed her religiously, were hovering behind her, looking uncertain but ready to back her up. They weren't the police, not even remotely trained, but to Karen, they were her personal SWAT team of suburban compliance. I took a careful step forward, trying to show I wasn't intimidated, but inside I was a storm of nerves and adrenaline. I had to stand my ground or this would escalate out of control. My mind raced. How do I protect my home, my space, without losing control? Every instinct screamed at me to act fast, but rational thought kept me in check. Karen's face twisted in frustration. You think you can just stand there? I could. Call the cops, I interrupted, my voice surprisingly steady. Yes, and I will. If you don't leave, I will call them right now. Her jaw tightened. I could see her calculating, trying to find a loophole, a reason to stay. And then she did something I didn't expect. She started moving toward me, clipboard raised, voice escalating into a shriek. You violate rules, this community. Time slowed. I had to act before she crossed that line. I stepped sideways, putting myself between her and the open living room, blocking her path without touching her. Karen, stop, right now, I said, my voice sharper, almost a command. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and outrage. You can't, she cried, as if my words were physically stopping her. I could see her desperation mounting, and it gave me a strange sense of power. This was my house, my ground, and somehow, despite the absurdity of the situation, I had the upper hand. But I couldn't relax, not yet. Every second she stayed in my home was a second closer to chaos. Her backup neighbors were shifting nervously, looking between her and me, realizing for the first time that Karen might not actually be in charge. I caught one of them hesitating, and that hesitation sparked something in me, a tiny, flickering hope that I could turn this around without anything exploding. Then Karen did something I didn't expect. She slammed the clipboard onto my coffee table with a dramatic thud that made the picture frames rattle. You will regret this, she yelled. Her voice cracked somewhere between fury and fear. And that's when I realized it. I could fight back, but not with anger, not with yelling. I had to be smarter, calmer, and just as relentless. If I kept my wits, I could protect my home, assert my boundaries, and, maybe, teach Karen a lesson she'd never forget. My stomach tightened as I took another deep breath. The room was silent except for her ragged breathing, the faint rustle of her backup shifting behind her, and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I knew one wrong move, hers or mine, and this suburban showdown could explode into something truly ridiculous or dangerously out of control. But I wasn't going to back down. Not today, not now. And that's when I stepped closer, voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife, and said the words that would set the stage for the fight of my life. Karen, you need to leave, before this gets even worse. Her glare pierced me, and for a moment I thought the next scene would be pure chaos. Little did I know, the next move would escalate things far beyond anything I could have imagined. I could feel my pulse in my temples as Karen's glare locked onto me. She was like a storm about to break, unpredictable and chaotic. Her clipboard wavered in her hands, and for a moment I could see fear flicker in her eyes, just a hint. That small crack in her armor gave me a surge of confidence, but I couldn't let it go to my head. One wrong move, and the entire neighborhood spectacle could explode in chaos. Karen's voice rose again, sharp and frantic. You can't just violate the rules. I have authority. Authority? In my living room? She was about to learn that authority didn't mean control, especially not in someone else's home. I took a deep breath, my mind working fast. If I stayed calm, I could turn her energy against her. You're right, Karen, I said, my tone deceptively calm. You do have authority over the HOA rules outside, not here, not inside my house. This is where I make the rules. Her face twisted in disbelief. You can't, she stammered as if my words physically hit her. Her backup neighbors shifted nervously behind her, unsure whether to intervene or run. I saw my opening. Slowly, deliberately, I started to block her movements, guiding her toward the front door without touching her. Just my presence, my stance, my calm authority. Every step she took felt like walking on a tightrope. I could see the panic growing, her carefully constructed power unraveling. Then she tried the classic Karen tactic, intimidation. She waved her clipboard like a weapon and jabbed at the air, shouting about fines, penalties, and imagined consequences. "If you don't comply, I will." I interrupted her mid-shout. "Stop. Right now, this isn't the street. This isn't the HOA meeting. This is my home. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. End of discussion." The room went tense. Her chest heaved, her lips trembled, and I could see the storm raging behind her eyes. But instead of retreating, she doubled down, taking a step closer, voice rising even more. You'll regret this. Everyone will know you're breaking the rules." That's when I realized I had to mix strategy with humor. Humor was my secret weapon. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone firm but dry, "if the world really cares about my mailbox alignment, I think we're all in bigger trouble than I thought." Her expression froze for a split second, a flash of confusion crossing her face. Humor threw her off balance. I pressed on, stepping slowly closer, never letting my guard down, keeping the tension tight. "Now, seriously, you need to leave. You've had your fun. The neighbors are watching, and honestly, I don't think you want to end up in the local gossip column." Her face went red, then paled. I could see the gears turning in her head, realizing that this wasn't going to be the victory parade she imagined. The threats, the rules, the dramatics, they were all crumbling under the weight of my calm persistence. Then came the move I had been waiting for. I reached toward the door slowly, confidently, signaling that this was the exit she needed to take. "This is your chance to walk out gracefully," I said, "or we can make it less graceful." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's backup shuffled nervously, sensing the shift in power. Her fists clenched, the clipboard quivering, and for a moment I thought she might try something reckless. But then something unexpected happened. Karen paused. She blinked rapidly, as if the absurdity of the situation finally hit her. I could almost hear the gears in her head grinding. This isn't my victory. This isn't my kingdom. I've overplayed my hand. And just like that, the first crack in her armor appeared. She stopped moving, glaring daggers at me, but taking no step forward. My chest heaved with cautious relief. I wasn't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had control. I stayed still, letting the tension hang in the room like a loaded gun. Every second counted. Every glance mattered. Karen's energy was explosive but contained for now. And I knew deep down that the next few moments would decide who walked away victorious from this suburban showdown. The battle lines were drawn. Karen's theatrics had hit a wall. My home was my fortress. And the next move? That would determine whether she would finally retreat or escalate this chaos to a level no one could ignore. By now, the entire block seemed to be holding its breath. I could hear faint shuffling, the murmur of voices behind closed doors, and the occasional squeak of a curtain as neighbors peered out. I realized that the spectacle wasn't just in my living room. It had spilled into the entire neighborhood. Everyone was watching Karen unravel in real time. Karen's face was a storm of fury and embarrassment. Her lips trembled as she tried to regain control, waving her clipboard as though sheer willpower could rewrite reality. This isn't over," she barked, her voice cracking with desperation. This community, I have authority." I took a slow step forward, keeping my tone calm but sharp, letting the tension hang like a rope ready to snap. "Karen, you've already overstepped. Every second you stay here makes this worse. Please just leave before this escalates." Her eyes darted around, panic flashing as she noticed yet another neighbor appearing cautiously at the window, peeking in like a detective surveying a crime scene. The absurdity of the situation was almost cinematic. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of HOA law, flailing in my living room while the street silently judged her every move. Then she tried her classic tactic, intimidation through escalation. She stomped her foot, pointing her clipboard like a sword. You think you can defy the rules, I held up my hand, forcing her to pause mid-sentence. "I don't think, Karen, I know, you've lost control here. This isn't about rules anymore, it's about common sense. And right now, common sense says you leave." Her backup neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. I could see them questioning their loyalty, realizing for the first time that Karen wasn't invincible. One of them muttered under their breath, something about overstepping, and I caught it. That tiny crack in her support made me feel a surge of hope. This battle wasn't just mine anymore. Karen's face went red, then paled as she realized the eyes of the neighborhood were on her. Every gesture, every shouted demand, every ridiculous threat was being watched. She flailed wildly, clutching her clipboard. And then she did something spectacularly absurd. She pointed at my perfectly ordinary coffee table and shouted, "You're violating Section 9? That table, it's not aligned with the feng shui standards of the community." I blinked, my mind momentarily frozen, then a chuckle escaped me despite the tension. "Karen," I said, voice steady, "I think the only feng shui being violated here is your sense of reality." Her mouth opened, as if to argue, but then she hesitated. Her face twisted with disbelief, realizing for the first time that her theatrics weren't intimidating anyone, they were entertaining them. The neighbors at the windows were snickering quietly, a few even whispering comments to each other. Karen's power wasn't just failing, it was crumbling spectacularly in public. I took another careful step toward the door, keeping my stance firm, voice calm but unwavering. "This is your chance, Karen. Leave now and save some dignity. Stay and, well, I'm not sure anyone will take you seriously after this." Her hands trembled, gripping the clipboard like a lifeline. Her backup shifted nervously behind her, muttering excuses. For a moment, it seemed like she might fight back one last time. But then, slowly, the fire in her eyes dimmed just enough to see the panic beneath. I could feel the tension in the room tighten to a snapping point. Every breath, every movement, every glance could push this confrontation over the edge. Karen's theatrics had reached a boiling point, and it was only a matter of time before she either retreated or made a mistake that would be unforgettable. And in that frozen moment, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting to protect my house. I was protecting my dignity, my sanity, and, in a way, the entire neighborhood from this over-the-top display of HOA madness. And I knew that what happened next could change everything. Karen opened her mouth again, trembling, probably trying to scream one final demand, but I could see it. The exhaustion, the disbelief, the realization that she might have pushed too far. The standoff was far from over, but I had the momentum. And if I played my next moves carefully, I could finally end this ridiculous saga. For now, we were locked in a silent battle of wills, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. Every eye on the street, every heartbeat in my chest, and every twitch in Karen's face was a reminder. This showdown wasn't over. Not yet. But the tide was turning. And I knew the next move. Her next move would decide the real winner of this suburban battlefield. The tension in the room was suffocating. Karen's frantic energy buzzed like an electric current, ready to ignite into chaos at any moment. I could see every muscle in her body taut, her hands gripping that absurd clipboard as if it were a weapon, her eyes darting from me to the windows where neighbors quietly observed her meltdown. And then, like a bolt of lightning, I saw it, the first real crack in her armor. Karen thrived on fear. She believed that her theatrics, her rules, and her self-appointed authority could make anyone obey her. But she had one weakness. She depended entirely on perception. The moment people realized she was overstepping, really overstepping, her power crumbled. And right now, the entire neighborhood had front-row seats to her unraveling. I took a careful step forward, keeping my voice calm but deliberate. "Karen," I said slowly, letting each word sink, "everyone watching knows you're in the wrong. This isn't about rules anymore. This is about boundaries, and you've crossed them." Her face twisted in outrage and confusion. You can't speak to me like that, I cut her off gently, almost teasingly. "I can, Karen, because it's my house, and because everyone watching knows it." Her eyes flicked to the windows, and I saw the shift, the panic rising, her confidence draining. Her backup neighbors shuffled uneasily, muttering under their breath, realizing for the first time that Karen wasn't in control. One even glanced toward the street, clearly imagining what the other neighbors were thinking. I smiled inwardly. The leverage was mine. I pressed on carefully, raising my voice just enough for her to hear, but not so loud as to sound threatening. "You've had your fun. You've made your threats, waved your clipboard, screamed about rules no one understands. But here's the truth, Karen, you don't own this house. You don't own my life. And your authority ends the moment you step through my door uninvited." I saw her shoulders slump slightly, a small but telling sign that my words were hitting home. She opened her mouth to argue, but then paused, searching for some rule, some loophole she could exploit. And that's when I realized she was grasping at straws. She had no backup plan, no real power here, just her bluffing and yelling. I could feel my heart pounding, adrenaline surging, but I stayed calm. Every word, every gesture had to count. "Look, Karen," I continued, my tone firm but almost kind. "You can leave now with some dignity, or you can stay, and everyone watching will see exactly what happens when someone tries to take what isn't theirs." Her face went pale. I could see her mind racing, realizing the inevitability of her situation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Even her so-called backup didn't know what to do anymore. And then she tried one last desperate tactic. This isn't fair, I have authority." "Authority?" I echoed, my voice calm, almost mockingly gentle. "Authority is earned, Karen, not stolen, not forced, and certainly not by barging into someone's home uninvited." For a split second she froze, and that split second was all I needed. I stepped a little closer, keeping my hands visible, my posture relaxed but unyielding. "It's over, Karen. You can leave now, or we escalate this to the police. Your choice." Her glare burned with frustration, but it was no longer the confident glare of someone in control. It was the glare of someone realizing that her plan had collapsed, her performance was unraveling, and she had no allies in the room. She was alone. The air seemed to hold its breath. Every neighbor peeking from behind curtains, every rustle outside, every quiet murmur contributed to the weight of that moment. Karen's theatrics were faltering. Her threats were hollow, and for the first time I felt a surge of relief and quiet triumph. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to form words. I could see the frustration building, the panic peeking through, the realization that she had been bested in the one arena she thought she controlled. And in that charged silence, I knew the tide had finally turned. I didn't need to celebrate yet. Karen's next move could still be unpredictable. But one thing was certain, the momentum had shifted. The stage was mine, the crowd, my neighborhood, was watching, and Karen's facade of power was cracking in real time. For the first time since she stepped into my living room, I could breathe a little easier. The fight wasn't over, but the path to victory was clear. And I knew that the next moves would decide the final outcome of this suburban showdown. The room felt like it had shrunk. Every heartbeat, every shuffling footstep, every gulp of air seemed amplified. Karen's face was red, tight with fury and disbelief, her hands gripping that ridiculous clipboard so hard her knuckles were white. I could see the desperation flicker behind her eyes, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they've lost control and the world is watching. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, voice steady but firm. "Karen, this is your last chance. Walk out the door now and no one gets hurt. Stay and you'll regret it." Her eyes narrowed and she let out a high-pitched shriek, pointing at me with a shaky finger. "I will not. You're violating the rules. You will pay for this." I held my ground, ignoring her threats, feeling the adrenaline sharpen every sense. I could sense the neighbors outside, peering in, feeling the tension as much as I did. Even her so-called backup behind her was frozen, unsure whether to intervene or flee. Karen's voice rose higher, almost cartoonishly frantic. She jabbed the clipboard toward me like a sword. "I am the law, I enforce the rules, you." And then she tripped. Not on anything dramatic, just the edge of my rug, but the timing was perfect. Her clipboard flew from her hands and landed with a loud thud in the corner of the room. She stumbled forward, arms flailing, face a mask of shock and humiliation. The room went still for a heartbeat, then I couldn't help it. A nervous laugh escaped me. Karen froze mid-stumble, glaring daggers at me, but there was no regaining her previous composure. She looked ridiculous, flailing like a storm-tossed bird. The tension in the room was electric, tense, absurd, and impossible to look away from. I stepped closer, calm but commanding. "Karen," I said, voice steady, "this is it. You've lost. Every neighbor watching knows it. Every threat you've made is empty. The power you thought you had, gone." Her eyes darted to the windows, seeing faces pressed to the glass, whispering, murmuring, judging. The realization hit her. Her reputation, her carefully curated authority was collapsing in front of everyone. Panic overtook anger now. This isn't fair," she squeaked, hands waving helplessly. "Karen," I interrupted, softening my tone just slightly. "Home is where respect lives. You've forgotten that. You've invaded, intimidated, and made threats. But it's over. Step outside, take a breath, and leave my house in one piece." Her backup finally spoke, muttering, "Maybe we should just go." Their hesitation was all I needed to see that the balance had fully shifted. Karen was isolated, flustered, powerless. She looked around, realizing she had no allies, no ground to stand on. Her face twisted with frustration, disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of shame. Her clipboard sat useless in the corner. Every argument, every dramatic claim, every self-righteous declaration had crumbled. And then she did the only thing left. She bolted for the door, yanking it open with as much dignity as she could muster. I stayed calm, letting her retreat, my heart still pounding, adrenaline still sharp, but a grin spreading across my face. The entire neighborhood had witnessed her unraveling, and I knew there would be stories about this for years to come. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally letting a breath escape. My hands were shaking, my chest heaving, but I felt victorious. Not just because I had protected my home, but because I had faced down the absurdity, the chaos, the storm of Karen's ego, and won. I walked slowly to the living room, surveying the room that had become the battlefield of a suburban power struggle. The furniture was mostly intact, though a chair had tipped over in the earlier commotion. My mind was racing, replaying every moment, every tense second, every ridiculous outburst. And in the silence that followed, I realized something important. This wasn't just a victory over Karen. It was a reminder that boundaries matter, that standing up for yourself, calmly, confidently, strategically, can overcome even the most absurd of challenges. I leaned against the counter, shaking my head, still half laughing at the absurdity. Karen had stormed in thinking she could intimidate me, thinking she could wield imaginary authority like a weapon. But the reality was simple. My home, my rules, my sanity, and today they had won. Outside, I could hear neighbors whispering, giggling, probably replaying every moment in their minds. I didn't mind. Let them. Karen's theatrics had been exposed, and the street would never look at her the same way again. I finally sank onto my couch, exhausted, heart still racing, and smiled. The battle wasn't just over, it had been won with a combination of calm, wit, and timing. And for the first time that day, I felt the sweet relief of victory. The house was quiet, too quiet. For the first time all day, I could hear my own breathing, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of leaves outside. Karen was gone. Her clipboard had been abandoned like a weapon in retreat, and the street was slowly returning to its usual rhythm. But the echo of the chaos lingered, laughter, whispers, and the occasional honk from a neighbor driving by, clearly catching up on the story. I sank onto the couch, exhausted but victorious. My heart still pounded from the adrenaline, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Not just because I had protected my home, but because I had stood my ground. I had faced Karen, the ultimate embodiment of HOA madness, and I had won. I thought about her storming down the street, muttering threats under her breath, probably trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. And I couldn't help but chuckle. Karen had always taken herself so seriously, wielding her imaginary power like a scepter, and yet today she had been humanized in the most public, ridiculous way possible. I looked around my living room, surveying the small signs of battle. A tipped-over chair, a slightly displaced rug, the lingering echo of shouted threats. It all felt absurd now, almost cinematic. And in that moment I realized the most important lesson. No one, not even the most self-righteous HOA president, can take what isn't theirs if you stand firm, stay calm, and act wisely. I leaned back and let my thoughts drift. I imagined the neighbors talking about it for weeks, giggling behind their curtains, sharing stories about the day Karen stormed my house and got schooled by, well, me. I didn't mind being part of the story. If anything, it felt like a small victory for everyone who had silently endured her reign of absurdity. Then I picked up my phone and checked my messages. There were a few texts from neighbors, some laughing, some asking if I was okay, and a couple even apologizing for not intervening sooner. But most of all, they expressed a quiet admiration. I smiled. Today had been a display of courage, wit, and boundaries, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. I walked over to the window, peeking out at the street. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Everything looked normal, peaceful, even idyllic. But I knew better. I knew that behind the calm surface, stories would ripple, reputations would shift, and Karen would be rethinking her approach for a long time. And me, I would savor the victory, not in gloating, not in boasting, but in knowing that I had defended what mattered most: my home, my peace, and my sense of self. A soft knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Mr. Jenkins holding a small plate of cookies. "Thought you might need these after your ordeal," he said, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. I laughed, taking the cookies, feeling the warmth of community, the kind of support you don't always notice until chaos makes it obvious. "Thanks, Mr. Jenkins," I said. "Believe me, I've had enough excitement for one day." He chuckled. "Just make sure Karen doesn't come back." I smiled, feeling the weight of the day lift completely. "Oh, she won't, not after today." As the sun set, I reflected on the madness, the tension, the ridiculous theatrics, and the quiet moments of triumph. I thought about boundaries, courage, and the strange satisfaction that comes from standing up for yourself in the most unexpected of battles. Karen had stormed in thinking she could intimidate me, thinking she could impose her rules, her ego, and her authority on my life. But the reality was simple. I had my home, my boundaries, and my wits, and that had been enough. I sank back into the couch, taking a deep breath, finally allowing myself to relax. The neighborhood was quiet again, the streets calm, the sun fading behind the houses. Life would return to normal, but the story of today, the day Karen lost it, would linger in the neighborhood for a long time. And as I closed my eyes, exhausted but victorious, I couldn't help but think. Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't just protect your home. It reminds everyone around you that sanity, courage, and humor are still alive in a world full of chaos. And today, I had proven it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.